doing all the signs that way.
Who are you?
We use Flintstone.
What are you looking at? How right now? I can pretty much get everyone with just a little bit. Do I want people sitting in the front because of the video purposes? Or it doesn't matter. No, I don't think it matters much. We'll see heads no matter what.
Let's start.
Yep.
Okay, we're going to get started. If we can find a spot to sit down, that would be great.
Oh, well, you know, I will, they still do it this part. My kids, my boys are 35 and 36 now. So this is when they were 11. Yes, you did, and that was probably the only thing I can tell you is that it probably was not a good decision.
Yeah.
We had our kids at 24.
Yes. Susan Langer.
Greatest thing we ever did. At least I had the energy of you all.
Yeah, you know, that's.
Right now, you're.
No, but she just followed what the ticket said, and she showed me a picture, although the date on the ticket was November.
That kid, that
But she said that she clicked on her thing, and I'm guessing it was an older.
Terry, I'm gonna have to.
I'm just saying.
Maybe we can see it.
All right, well, why don't we get going here? First of all, thank you for coming today. We threw a little curveball in that we shifted venues from St. Thomas in downtown Minneapolis to St. Thomas on this side of the river. Thought we'd test something new out. We only had one person who went to the downtown Minneapolis location, so the rest of you.
Thought you weren't going to bring that up, Rick.
You want us to point him out? I know who.
Actually, no, she's not here. I think she's not going to come. Anyway, her loss. Couple things before we get started. First is we're going to video this. So when you do have a question, if you can, try to speak up and clearly, although I'm sure Mike Bromelkamp will have no problems with clearly communicating his questions. And then for those of you who haven't been to one of our Network Connect events, my name is Rick Brimacomb, and welcome. This is a reverse elevator pitch, so rather than companies talking towards the audience saying, hey, we're trying to raise money and we got the greatest thing since sliced bread, we've been doing this for maybe about 2 years, about every quarter or so, where we bring investors and business buyers, put them on the panel, talk a little bit about their perspectives and experiences, and have them share their insights with the audience. And I have plenty of questions, and we'll kind of lead them through a discussion. But with that said, as I mentioned, that is an opportunity for you folks to ask questions, and please just raise your hand or give me the head nod or whatever, and I'll try to weave in your questions. Dick Summerstead had the original concept for the Network Connect back in 2011, and in 2013 I joined Dick on the effort, and this reverse elevator pitch, as well as the other ones where the companies are presented, the Investor Connection events, that has been formed over the last couple of years. The Network Connect was created to be a platform for connecting investors, companies, job seekers, service providers, and folks trying to grow their businesses. It was a platform to act as a catalytic gateway to making things happen for folks like you trying to grow your businesses. Our events have led to about $4.5 million being invested in companies, and our monthly newsletter goes out to about 15,000 different angel investors, because we have a bunch of different angel funds and venture funds that are part of the network. And then in the business community, actually the outreach now is about 35,000 business people get our emails. And so if anybody has an interest in talking more about the reach that we have now and sponsorships and those types of things, let me know. And welcome to a few of our St. Thomas students over here. Welcome. There's lots of pizza, so help yourself. Thank you for coming. So that dovetails nicely into our sponsors for today. So thank you to University of St. Thomas, Olson Thielen, Mike Brimacomb, raise your hand, Mike. Full service accounting and consulting firm, and Mike has been involved with the Network Connect since early on, and is also one of the sponsors of my other platform, Club Entrepreneur. So thank you for your support, Mike. Wilkerson Guthman, CPAs, business consultants, and financial advisors. They're not here today, but thank you to them. Schwegman Lumber Woosner is an intellectual property law firm. Also, unfortunately, not in attendance, but we appreciate their support. I don't know that we have anybody here from the Clean Tech Open, but Clean Tech Open has been a supporter of the Network Connect and the various things that we've done. I've been a mentor in the past at the Clean Tech Open, so if anybody wants to learn about that, let me know. Mojo Minnesota is an innovation and entrepreneurship support group, and promoting the entrepreneurial community here in Minnesota. I'm involved with Mojo Minnesota. They've been a supporter of the Network Connect. And then the last two, Drake Bank. I know we have a couple of folks from Drake Bank here. Rick in the back and another gentleman in the back. Appreciate the support of Drake Bank. And then the Innovator Mindset, Dennis up here. Wave to everybody so we know who you are. Dennis, I'm sure would be happy to tell you a little bit more about his platform, but very interesting concept of trying to identify the characteristics associated with successful business people to help you determine who you might want to have on your team on the front end, or who you might want to invest in, or in the case of Tim Sheehan in the middle, who's looking at buying a business, who he might want to support as he looks to buy a company. So anyway, without the generous support of those sponsors, things like this wouldn't happen. So thank you very much to our sponsors, and to the extent you all can support them, please do. They're all good folks, and I've had working relationships with all of those firms. Way to connect with the Network Connect is the website, which coincidentally is thenetworkconnect.com. There's also an email list. Happy to put you on that list if you'd like to be added to the email distribution list. So that leads us to our panelists today. We'll work my right to the far right. John Dinusson is the founder and president and CEO of OrthoCor Medical. OrthoCor is a mobile, non-invasive therapeutic device used to alleviate knee pain, minimize swelling, and restore physical function. John's prior experience is venture capital, investment banking, and then helping accelerate emerging growth companies at Bloomberg Capital, Bethalzar Capital, and the Innovative Ventures, which is where I met John early part of the last decade. So John and I have known one another for probably pushing about 15 years or so. We also have worked on some projects together, so I have a lot of respect for John and his ability. And then I think most importantly to this conversation is with OrthoCor, John raised a lot of money over an extended period of time, right into the teeth of the bad economy. And every time I talked to John on the phone, I said, I don't know anybody else who's raising money like you've been able to raise money. And so hopefully John will be able to share some of his secrets with us today. I certainly hope so, and that was why I really thought it would be a relevant part of this conversation, is John's experience at OrthoCor. Tim Sheehan is the founder of Sheehan Consulting Group. Tim's own consulting business focuses on retail and service businesses. The bulk of his work experience came at Best Buy, where he rose to EVP and Chief Administrative Officer. And actually, Tim and I went to high school together and also ran around here at St. Thomas when he was going to school here. But Tim actually started out on the sales floor out at Roseville, or Minnetonka. Minnetonka. And so Tim, literally in college, was working on the floor at, was it Best Buy or Music Land?
Turned to Best Buy.
It just turned to Best Buy and made it up to, as I said, EVP and Chief Administrative Officer. Forgot to mention that John actually studied here at St. Thomas as well, so we have two folks that have the purple blood and DNA from St. Thomas. Anyway, most recently, Tim was president and CEO of Lazy Days out of Florida, founded in 1976. Lazy Days is the largest destination RV site in North America. Tim did that for a couple years, 4 years, kind of got sick of flying out and being down there for a few days and coming back here. He's got two wonderful kids and a lovely and talented wife, so made a good choice deciding to stick closer to home. Thank you for joining our panel today, Tim. And the angle with having Tim here is his latest effort is he's looking for a business to buy. And when I was talking to him on the phone recently about that process, learned a lot about how to gauge whether the seller is motivated or not, how to assess a company. And I thought his experience as being out there looking to buy a business could add a lot of value to this conversation as well. So thanks for joining us, Tim. Last but not least, Doug Ramler is an attorney at Plant Moody. He's a principal in the entrepreneurial services and technology practices at Plant Moody, where he's practiced for 12 years, and he has 25 years of startup experience. And I was trying to think, we did a deal through, I want to say Steve Mersil, and what was the precursor to Rain Corp like 20 years ago. So long time ago. Anyway, a lot of years ago. I've known Doug for a long time. In addition to his work as a lawyer, he's also an angel investor, and he's active with Irish Angels, which is a national network of angel investors who went to Notre Dame. And then he also has done a variety of things to support the Notre Dame entrepreneurial community. He specializes in early stage companies, helps them with legal counsel, financing, strategy, in addition to being an entrepreneur himself, an angel investor. So for a variety of reasons, Doug is joining us on the panel here today. It's fun for me to have been friends with these three guys for so many years and know their backgrounds and how much they can share with all of you, and looking forward to doing that. So I kind of gave you my version of their background, so let's hear a little bit from each of them, a minute or two, just to kind of add a little color to what I told everybody. Let's start with you, John.
Sure, thanks, Rick. So I basically started my career at a pretty young age out in California, raising money for traditional venture capital, so boutique investment banking. We morphed into a venture capital firm as Blumberg Capital, and we worked with about 47 different companies, 5 which went public. A company called Checkpoint Software, so we were one of the leaders in internet security, the leading firewall company at the time. Then I came back as the world went to 2.0. I just had no interest. Now that firm is doing Hootsuite and stuff I don't care about. And so came back to Minnesota to get into medical device. Spent a couple years in southern Minnesota where I'm from. I was funded by McKnight, Grant the 3M family, to help with early stage companies. And really I was just trying to learn medical device. And so founded OrthoCor Medical in 2007, raised $6 million from over 80 investors, so $25,000 at a time. And we now have a class 3 medical device that pushes an RF field into your knee or joints, back, ankle, wrist, and we are FDA approved for pain, swelling, and arthritis, both non-surgically and post-surgically, so a very large market. I was acquired in January by a company called Ceres, which is going to be the leading orthopedic company for animals, so cats and dogs. So this is like an unloading brace, but for a dog. And so we're using this technology into the animal market for hip dysplasia and things like that. So good news is we did about $2 million in revenue last year just on the human side. We'll do about $6 million this year, 85% operating margins. So it took 9 years to get there. That's just the way the world is these days. It was very difficult. We were out of money at times. I didn't pay myself, so it was a true entrepreneur story. I do a little teaching at the U and the master's program in engineering for entrepreneurship, and participate on a few different investment groups.
Hey, John, how many different kind of rounds or tranches, and maybe you can't even count them all, but it was a number.
Yeah, so I did 5, well, I was never not raising money. So it was 5 rounds of all common. So I refused to take preferred. I had options to take venture capital money, and I wouldn't do it because I didn't want to dilute my investors. So my investors were very happy. In fact, after the acquisition, 4 or 5 of my investors came back in as we raised another $850,000. We did that in 2 months. My colleagues sold a company called Exos for $40 million off of $3 million of investment. So we're actually having a blast. Everyone complains in medical device about how terrible it is and reimbursement. I do all my business in workers' comp, and private insurance companies won't pay for as a new product. Screw them. I'll find a different market. Niche markets are great places to be as you're building a company, and we plan to be a $100 million company in the next 3 to 5 years.
Great, thanks. Tim, tell us a little bit about your bio and fill in some of the cracks
Well,
there.
unlike John, I'm not good at raising money, more at spending it. So, you know, when I started my career, as Rick mentioned, I was a senior here at St. Thomas at Sound Music, and, you know, we had an entrepreneur and a founder at the time, Dick Schultz, who, you know, the company was $50 million when I started at Best Buy, and I can distinctly remember telling my brother I just started working for this huge company and had 6 stores. And when I was done after almost 30 years, it was $50 billion. And I went through a lot of growing, you know, from a part-time employee to, you know, responsibility for operations, Geek Squad, IT, supply chain. Most of it I didn't understand. But it was an amazing deal because what I got to see is I got to see other entrepreneurs get integrated into a very big company. I had the opportunity to work with Robert Stevens from the Geek Squad, the team that brought in Magnolia Home Theater, the team that brought in Pacific Sales. I spent 2 years at Musicland on that acquisition, didn't go well, all of that. So I really was intrigued by, you know, that model and what these other founders had done to build their businesses. So it was a great experience. What I had an opportunity to do is go to another opportunity and become the CEO. I'd never done that before, so I thought it was really an opportunity now to get out of the big box world and get into a business where I had responsibility for the whole enchilada. So ran Lazy Days RV for almost 4 years. That was PE owned by Wayzata Capital here, actually local. Great experience, making a number of decisions in a very competitive industry, but growing. I'm not an RVer, but the RV business has been growing for 7+ years since the recession and doing really well. And I learned a lot about just the grit you have in some of these small RV dealerships, because we went and made an acquisition and added some more to our venue. But I think what that did is it opened my eyes to being an owner. I started to see what these owners of the other competitors in RVs and some of the acquisitions we did were going through, and hence decided that it was time for me to own my own business here in the Twin Cities. And that's the journey I've been on since January 2nd. And it's been a great experience so far. We'll talk more about that.
Great. Yeah, Doug, tell us a little bit more about your background.
Like John, I ventured out to California early in my career. I attended law school at UCLA, and then I went up to the Bay Area and worked for a firm. Out there, you know, back in the go-go days, the law firms would all either invest in their clients or do some funky arrangement, and that was appealing to me as an attorney, as an investor, and I sort of tracked that. And then after I came back to Minnesota, I brought some of those things back here, and one of the things that we do is we like to be flexible with our clients. We'll do funky arrangements, we'll take some equity, try and be creative. So that was sort of the start of my investing, if you will, and I started making some investments on my own, and then I had a group of guys that we started making investments together, and then one thing led to another, and there were several of us who went to Notre Dame talking about funding companies that Notre Dame grads and students and professors had started, and so we got together and started this group called Irish Angels. I was one of the founding members, and it's now 170 members. We have members across the country who meet 4 times a year. I'll get into a little bit more later, but it's been a great process to help start and grow that organization. And in terms of my practice, I work with startup and emerging companies. My smallest client is worth nothing. And just an idea, my biggest client is approaching probably $1 billion within the next 12 months, and they were a startup at 1.2. And a lot of what I do is it's certainly legal work, but it's also the investment banking and strategic side as well. I tend not to get involved in the day-to-day legal work, but it's more the strategic and problem solving. And it's a lot of fun to work with entrepreneurs on a day-to-day basis. And I, in fact, started a company with a couple of other folks. It's a local company called Kipsu. It's a text messaging-based customer service platform, and we've actually done quite well. In addition to being a co-founder, I'm an investor and an advisor, so I'm working, things are working out on 3 fronts.
Great, thank you. John, back to you. Talk a little bit about your investment background, the groups that you worked with, who it was, how it worked, how it was involved, and then maybe dovetail that in a little bit to kind of the angel kind of network that you built.
Sure. So I was lucky enough, I was over in Laos and Thailand. I was thinking about being a monk, and
That's true, by the way.
and I decided, no, I want to do stuff. And I thought the best way to do stuff would be to be a venture capitalist. So I had a 20-year plan in my head, but I came back and I ran into a guy by the name of David Blumberg. And David was top of his class, Harvard and Stanford, and he had worked for Fred Adler, who's, you know, a lot of venture capital, people want to go to school for it, and it's just not there. It's really a mentorship business. And Fred Adler was really one of the fathers of venture capital out in New York. Participated in Apple very early. And then David had worked with the Brofman family, Edgar Brofman up in Canada. So he did Teva Pharmaceuticals, which is a large generic pharmaceutical company. He worked on Columbia Records. And he literally we started as a business development fund for equity, and I was the secretary. I was the number one, the first hire at 22. I think we called myself the operations manager, and basically learned everything by doing. We grew out that firm to 14 of us, so then we shrunk it down to 4 of us as we moved into a venture capital firm. I was responsible for Kleiner Perkins' biggest loss at the time, a company called Wine Shopper, which was going to be the Amazon of wine. They were spending $2.5 million a month. We did our job. We raised the money. That's what we were supposed to do. Anyway, so I learned that, and at that time I thought of angels as something I just would swipe away. They were like gnats. They were annoying, and so really just didn't have. That was just the training that I had gotten, and so to go from that to going to the angel side, I don't know if there's a whole lot of people that have gone from the venture operating side to the angel operating side. I do miss looking at all the different business plans and how much you can learn and being a little snot and having access to very, very intelligent people. But I've had so much more fun on the operating side. Every day is incredible. And I think a lot of the skill set I learned about having a 98% failure rate at Blumberg Capital helps me out at the bars. I'm just kidding. But to come back to Minnesota, I didn't have any contacts, 0. I'm from Rochester. I didn't know any. My investors are not your traditional investors. They're old St. Paul guys. They're people from Alexandria. There's a couple farmers from Wilmer, and these are people that I all cold called, and I think that's how I met Rick, in fact, and just got to know them. And I'll say that on the angel side, the 3 things that matter most are trust, trust, and trust. I think raising angel capital makes you a better person because investors can smell that. Literally, the 3 important things are trust, telling a story, and being excited about it. I mean, if you're not excited about it, I talk too fast, which actually helps me a lot in angel investing because it creates an excitement in the room, I think. I've been told to slow down, but I think that if you can create that excitement, because if you're not excited, why would they be, right? And so, just learn how to create relationships. You have to, when you're raising angel money, you have to figure out how to create a relationship. For example, I raised money from Maverick Angels out of 10,000 Oaks, California. Most people would have presented. I got 10 people that were interested, and then you call them and say, would you like to invest? Well, I didn't do that. I got to know the people that were interested, asked them about their law practice and entertainment, got to start talking to them once a week. I ended up getting $30,000 or $40,000 from them. But it's all about being trustworthy, telling a good story that's believable, and then creating that relationship. And then also, of course, what I call bouncing or whatever. You know, every time that I have somebody who wants to invest, I ask them who else I should be talking to and creating this network of investors.
All right, great. Tim, tell us a little bit about your investment background, all 4 or 5 months of it, and kind of the process that you've gone through.
Well, it's been great because, you know, I had to reestablish a network really here in the Twin Cities. While I knew a lot of folks, I've been gone for a while. I was really working down in Florida most of the time. But I think the eye-opening thing for me is it's a pretty inefficient market when I thought about how hard it is to find something you want to buy that meets your criteria. Everyone told me it would be hard, and everyone said, hey, I'll take you 6, 12, maybe 18 months or more to find the business that you're ultimately looking for. And I thought, well, I do everything faster, so I'll listen, but I'll find something in a few months. That is not the case. And what I found is that most of the businesses that you'd actually want to buy, the criteria I had, you know, business to business, a certain size, certain level of performance. You know, I'm on the other end of the spectrum. I'm looking for a well-established, long-standing business. You know, maybe an owner who's was the founder, grew the business, wants to move on, retire. I found that wasn't going to happen most likely through a broker or looking on the internet, right? It was going to happen the hard way. You're going to have to get on the phone. You're going to have to network. And as I studied the issue, I found that, you know, almost 80% of the businesses that really are the good ones are going to come through your network, through your relationships. And so that I have found to be proven out once again. And as I start to hone in on a couple here this month and look at how it all came to be and where did I get the connection, it's through the network, and it's doing the work and making the connections with people and being clear on what you want. I think the best thing for me is early on got a lot of coaching from people, many like folks in this room who said take the time to get your criteria clear on what you're looking for and stick to it. And as my wife reminded me when I came home after my first 2 weeks into it with all these crazy companies that I said I wanted to buy, she said, would you read me your criteria again that we both agreed on before you got off on this venture? And I read it to her. Of course, the 3 I was excited about didn't fit any of it. But I thought a hockey rink company would be really cool, or this would be cool, or, you know. So it took some reining in for Tim. But, you know, you figure it out and you stick to your knitting.
And let me add Chris, who is also an EOS implementer. So Chris, Tim's wife, probably was pretty good at keeping you, you know, reined in and focused.
Yeah,
Correct?
reality-based. I mean, she's got 60-plus companies. She's worked here with the Twin Cities and really had a nice window into, you know, what does it really take to run a small, mid-sized business, and what industries have promise, and what are the ones that are performing, doing well, and what are the ones that are struggling not. So that really was helpful in kind of shaping the criteria and my path.
Okay, great. Doug, tell us a little bit about kind of, a little bit more, I know you alluded to some of it, but a little bit more about your investment background, the group, how it works, so forth.
Yeah, just for me, my investing started in my career after I earned a little bit of money after a few years and had a little extra cash. I started investing small amounts in client companies and other companies that I had become aware of, primarily because I knew the managers, I knew sort of the inside story. And again, I trusted them. I developed a trust relationship. And so I'd start to put a little bit of money in, you know, 10 to 25,000. Over time, I realized you can't get a lot of bang for your buck with that, and you can't change the deal terms. So then I, myself and 4 other gentlemen, set up a fund that we invested in, and we would make investments of $50,000 to $100,000, and it was a little nicer. We got better terms and more influence. And then, you know, in terms of the Irish Angels, sort of the next step, we decided we wanted to be able to lead deals. We wanted to be able to set the tone, if you will, and get attractive deal flow. So we set up Irish Angels, must be about 10 years ago now. There were 8 of us that started, and we reached out through the Notre Dame network, and we hired an executive director, and we learned from all the other angel groups out there. Figured out what we wanted to do, and the way Irish Angels works is there are 170 of us. We have a due diligence progress. It's pretty rigorous, and we utilize students quite a bit. If you're interested, you have to have some Notre Dame DNA to get some money, either graduate or one of your investors has to be a graduate, or just some relationship to the university. We bring you in, we'll do an initial screening and then a secondary screening, and then if you pass that, then you'll come to our quarterly meeting, be one of 3 company presenters, and if we can get $250,000 or more of interest, then we'll fund it, set up a separate entity, make the investment. Sometimes we'll lead deals, but typically we'll follow with others. We like to have a great lead investor who's just looking to fill out the round, and our deals are the rounds are typically 1 to 3 million seed and Series A deals, and then we put in anywhere from 250 to $1 million. In terms of industry, it's all over the place, but it's a lot of software and tech, and it's some med tech and other. We just invested in a whiskey company as well, so that was a one-off, but pretty much all over, and we have members who have various backgrounds. So we have people who will lead the due diligence, lead the round. And again, their experience is what we rely on to make good decisions.
Thank you. John, come back here. Talk a little bit kind of whether it's your venture days or the investment banking days or how you sold OrthoCor, kind of the investment criteria, team, market, product, financial, stuff like that. How do you bucketize, if that's a word, a deal?
Sure. So I was taught from an early age on that the 3 or 4 things that you should look at for a venture investment is management, 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 and management. I thought it really applied to tech because often, majority of the time, the technology that you end up investing on is not the technology that enters the marketplace at the end. And it may not even be in the same vertical. I've now learned that applies to medical just as much. I thought that was a tech phenomenon, but no. So you need a management team that can figure these things out and can perform. So that's really what I'm always looking for. Now that being said, what we're really looking for is an unfair advantage. I don't think that many people have truly unique ideas. I think if one person's thought of it, somebody else has somewhere in this world as well. So you need to have either an unfair IP advantage, a distribution advantage, a picket fence around exclusive with somebody who's sourcing stuff, something that differentiate yourself from others. Now, God forbid you don't have any of those things, right? So then it just becomes an execution play. And then it really starts going back to management. Is this the best 4 people or 5 people in the country that can execute on this idea? That's hard to evaluate, but what you're really looking for from the venture side is IP, something that doesn't allow other people to compete, and whether that's a PMA in medical device or some sort of proprietary knowledge. It's tough as it is to invest. I think something like, I've seen different numbers, but 93 or 94% of all angel investment deals fail. So that's where you're starting at. So you got to figure out how to succeed. The thing I haven't figured out, by the way, is I remember in the venture capital side of the days that, the average venture capital firm figures out, well, we'll invest $100 million over 10 deals. 4 of them will fail. 6 of them will be zombies. I mean, they don't really succeed, but let's use different numbers. 4 of them fail. 3 of them become zombies, and 1 or 2 of them are home runs. And those are the ones that make the portfolio work. Well, from my side now, on the operating side, how do I make sure that I'm that home run? Because I only have so many years of life, and if deals are taking 10 years to do, how do you don't have time to go through that process 10 times, right? So you've got to figure out the opportunity that will get you to that home run.
Great. Tim, tell us a little bit about your criteria. You mentioned that you went through the process to come up with, and you sent it to me. Thank you. Talk a little bit about your criteria.
We had criteria around, what kind of businesses we were interested in, that we wanted to pursue in the market, size, more along the lines, business, service, IT, marketing, et cetera. More in the single-digit million, something really small that I get my arms around with, because I'm going to be actively involved in running the business. as I met with more owners and started to, kind of step back a little bit from that, you really start to hone in on, what is the competitive advantage of the business? Is there something that's maybe a little dull and needs to be re-energized, or there needs to be some work around really repositioning what that business does and who it serves? But I think one of the things that was interesting to me when I think about criteria is I started to also look a lot more at who's got a stated set of values for the company. And does it ever come up with the owner? Is it even a factor in the business? I mean, the values is the rudder of any business, in my opinion. That establishes how you're going to deal with, your own employees, your coworkers, and ultimately, of course, your customers. So values, having some sort of mission or vision, some higher purpose in the business, is that understood? And where do you want to go long term? And it was interesting to me, not surprising, that a lot of business owners, or maybe their number two even in the business, couldn't tell you what that was. And I've looked at hundreds of websites. The other thing that in terms of having a criteria is when you do start to get clear on where you want to go, how many businesses you look at on the web just as a precursor to do your due diligence, that you stare at the website and you flip through pages and you can't tell what the hell they do. I mean, I would say about a third of them, I couldn't get my head, what do you do? And so, while this sounds basic and, you hear it in your classes, you hear it in work, you read it in the books, there is an opportunity for people in business to really subscribe to following that playbook where you have to answer those difficult but important questions about your business and live and breathe it. I mean, that's a huge opportunity and became more and more of the criteria I looked at hard.
Great, thanks. Doug, tell us a little bit about the investment criteria for yourself as well as the Irish Angels.
For myself, it's really, again, it's a trust issue. I need to get comfortable with people. Again, and I think in terms of Irish Angels, the number one requirement is quality management. And again, it goes back to trust. Experience is very helpful. If you've been through this before and you've had a successful exit, that's a great plus. The other thing is coachability. There are some entrepreneurs and management who think they know more than, the collective wisdom of 170 Irish Angels, and when that shows up, we pass because we know the experience is going to be a bad one. You have to be coachable. Just like when I coach my son's baseball team, the kids who don't listen to coaching will not improve. The kids who do will improve. Same thing in investing, I believe. Two other criteria. One is scalability. The market has to be big enough to be successful. If you have a company and you're totally successful with your plan, but the market is so small, we're not going to make a very good return, it's not worth our effort. And the other is you might have great technology, but you need distribution, you need a plan to get the product out. So management is absolutely number one, and then scalability in a big market opportunity, and then third is the distribution and sales of your product.
Great, thank you. Again, I have a bunch of questions. I'm going to keep rolling, but if somebody has anything they want to chime in on, please do not hesitate. All right, so opening this up to the panel. Oh, yeah, right here.
John, I've got a question for you. Right now I'm in the process of raising money, and what's being said a lot is give skin in the game on investing. I unfortunately don't have the luxury right now of putting my own money in. How does that, when you go talk to investors and maybe, look for $25,000 chunks, how does that come across when you're enthused and everything is working out just fine, you're there, but you don't have the opportunity to put in your own money? How does that come across to an investor? Can you overcome that somehow?
You can. So in this deal, I didn't have my own capital in the deal from the get-go. I never have put capital. No, my brother, my aunt, my next-door neighbor, my parents, my law firm that I was in the IDS tower. I'm just kidding. If this didn't go well, I was going to be having a lot of Thanksgivings alone. But you can, every investor has their own criteria, right? And so you can't. There are going to be certain investors that are just going to say, unless you have money in this, I'm not putting my money in it. Okay, fair enough. I've also got entrepreneurs who tell me the worst thing you can do is put a bunch of money into your own deal, because that's not very good diversification. Steve Jobs would put in $100 million into his own deal, and that is, if he would have had a financial planner, we would have told him that that's the worst idea that he could have ever thought of. Worked out for him. So I would say that you can work your way around it as long, I didn't take a salary for a while. I paid myself very little for 2 years. So there's ways that you can demonstrate that you're all in. I've taken literally 1 day of vacation in the last 9 years. So there's other things that you can do if you don't have that capital to demonstrate that you're all in. It doesn't have to be financial.
I totally agree with that and would second that is, okay, well, what does commitment look like to you and your personal situation or family situation? And so commitment can come out in a lot of different ways. It does not have to just be money. Now, there will be some people that will hold that to you and then you just say thanks and, hey, do you have another person or two I can call and move on to the next one?
Another thing that I would add to that is I've had several companies recently where they've been in that situation. But the thing is to be very honest and upfront about it. And I've had a couple of entrepreneurs say, here's my financial statement, my personal financial statement. It shows that 95% of my net worth is tied up into this company. To me, that's a huge positive from an investor standpoint. And you'll find that some investors, when they see that, if they invest, they will try to get you partially liquid. They will say, that's not right. You can't work for nothing, because at some point you're going to make a bad decision about the future of the company. Let's get a little bit off the table for you so that you can manage this the right way long term and generate a return for the investors.
Question, yeah.
Thanks, Rick. You guys, would you comment a little bit about exit strategies for investors today and what you're seeing most of them want out there? I mean, are they in it for the long haul? Do they have to have what kind of exit strategies are you seeing? Are you seeing all over the board, depending on the company? Because I'm getting a lot of questions about exit strategy. The startup that I'm involved in isn't interested in doing a sale of the business in the next 5 to 10 years. They'd rather continue to build the business. I'm just curious what you're finding out there in the marketplace.
Tim, you want to jump on that or?
I'll jump in real quick. So most venture investors aren't interested in a lifestyle business, right? So they want to see a return. Even if they know that it's going to be 10 years, they want to think that it's going to be 3 to 5 years. My final investor presentations didn't really show financials, which is what I would teach against that. But I had my own reasons for doing that because our financials sucked at the time. We were doing $300,000 a year in revenue. However, what I could do is say, listen, I was smart enough to know what other companies like mine had been acquired for in the marketplace. So I can say you can use you can be very truthful and not use facts. Meaning, you could say these other companies were sold for we think that this company will be sold for 40 to 50 million over a 3 to 5 year period, right? Or you could just say it's going to be sold for a lot. You can do a Trump. And just end things there. I mean, nobody really knows, right? It depends if you get into an auction or if there's a lot. It's almost impossible to predict that. So you're just trying to create a story that they're interested in. I don't know about your exact situation, but there's very few angel investors that want their money locked up for 10 or 20 years unless it's such a phenomenal opportunity that they'd be better off most times than putting their money in the S&P.
I think it's become a bigger challenge for angels because we don't have the IPOs that we used to. It's much more difficult to get an exit. I think it's important for the entrepreneur, for the company to be able to say, as John mentioned, in my industry, these are the metrics of companies when they're sold. This is the revenue milestone I have to hit. When I do that, my company will be sold for $50 million because the investor is going to take those numbers and bring them back to their investment and the deal terms. If you're going to sell for $50 million and you want to have a pre-money valuation of 25, I'm not interested because I'm not going to make any money. You need to know that back-end number, what it could be, and you need to work back, and the investors need to feel comfortable they're going to get some chance of success. If you're successful, they'll make some money. The reality is a lot of next round investors will trump what I put in, and if I don't get a reasonable deal up front, then I'm just wasting my money.
Couple things I'd add to that is some awareness on your part about the logical buyers to say, hey, these are the categories. I'm not saying these will be the buyers, but these are the kinds of companies, so that you've thought through that exit. And so that you can just demonstrate that you've put a little bit mind share towards that. And then, as Doug mentioned, slightly different verbiage around it is they're going to assess your deal on a risk-reward basis. And so how you price it allows them to figure back into what their returns will be. And then I was going to actually get Tim to chime in here. Tim, on the sellers that you've talked to, how many of them have been willing to carry paper? How many of those folks have just wanted to cash out? Or what's in the buying universe these days, what do the terms look like?
You know, it depends on the industry, but, like IT service firms, there's a lot more being carried back in a bigger percentage than some of the other businesses. But it varies. But there's definitely a willingness, particularly depending on what their personal life situation is, for doing a carryback and getting creative with the structure.
Okay, and then as Doug mentioned, what used to be when Doug and I got started in the business, when people were doing a deal, you'd say, well, gee, here's how we might go public and here's how we would sell. And the reality is, for 99.5% of the companies going public's not a possible out. So it's more about the M&A. That means, again, goes back to, you have to understand what the multiples are, you have to understand what returns look like, you have to understand who might buy it. John sold just common stock, but if you do a preferred deal, people are going to want to have a 5-year put so they can force the issue 5 years down the road. Those would just be a couple of things that would happen. And somebody raised their hand, yeah, right here, Tim.
So Doug, for what kind of, and in reality, what does the return look like? Is it a 6%, 8%, 10%? Is not a percent? Is it, what is?
For Irish Angels, generally it's we want 3 times our money on the portfolio, but with each investment we want to get 10 times. We won't invest unless we believe there's a reasonable basis for that company providing a 10 times return. And of course the reality is, you do 10 deals, as the other panelists have said, you do 10 deals, a number of fail, a couple of them might return their money, and it tends to be 1 or 2 companies that make up that return. And that's just the reality.
So you get your 10x back from those 1 or 2 companies?
Well, yes, that's how you generate. That one company may be 50x, but ultimately we're going to get 3x on our portfolio if one of those hits.
That makes sense. And then, what do you mean by IT firms carryback? And then my final question would be, what is a put?
Well, one of the things that I've seen and dealt with some of the owners of IT companies is that there are generally higher multiples in the small to mid-sized business market than others, much like software and others. And so they appear to be more willing to do a carryback, a third, maybe as much as a half.
What's a carryback?
So they're going to help finance the sale, and there's going to be an earnout, over a period of time that, you might come in and finance half or 3/4 of the purchase price, and then the ownership will, carry back some paper on that. So they're going to help you finance that business, and there'll be a payout down the road 3-5 years later.
Just to make sure that's clear. So if he's buying a business for $10 million, and you put $5 million down, and then you pay the other $5 million over time, which may or may not be tied to performance, possibly some of it or a lot of it, but not necessarily. So basically you're getting financed by the business seller. Back in the old days with houses, a lot of people did that with a contract for deed, and the seller would finance that. The put part of the equation as a term in a preferred deal, lots of times the investors will make somebody take the investor out after some period of time. Oftentimes it's 5 years. And so what that allows the investor to do is have a lever to make something happen So the investor puts in their money knowing that after 5 years, they're going to be able to at least influence a decision as to whether the company's sold or refinanced or whatever. So it puts a little bit of power in the hands of the investor. Yep.
So let's talk about the deals on the mix of debt, equity, convertible, and what does the panel think about the safe? The simple agreement for future.
Yep.
Yep, I'm in the middle of one of those right now with a company called, so I'm the chair of the board of something called Adrenacard, which is an EpiPen a competitor. I also work with a company called Vugo, which is the leading shared ride advertising and marketing company in the country right now. And because we're looking at generating capital from not only California, but also places like Japan and Singapore, and we have a safe in place. I think a safe is very hard to sell around here. I'll tell you a story of my first round at OrthoCor. I went down to Rochester and I had all the big money construction guys and folks around a conference room, and I came in with a convertible note. And I told them how great this was for them because I really wanted to protect them from a Series A that was going to dilute them. And they said, how much am I going to get? And I said, no. This is set by the round. This protects you from, I'm really looking out for you guys to make sure that you don't get diluted and whatever. Okay, so how much am I going to get? I ended up saying, all right, I'll be back down here in 2 months. And I came back to them with a straight equity deal. The more complicated you make something and more unvanilla, as I like to call it, or non-vanilla, I should say. I don't think it's unvanilla, like cyber chocolate. Anytime you do something that's not vanilla, it makes it harder to sell a deal, is my belief. And so, there are times that a convertible note makes a lot of sense. One of this Adrenacard right now is doing a convertible note, but that's because we're about to raise a venture arm. I always say that, and it's really a bridge financing, so it's a debt instrument. I hate bridges, right? Bridges are usually a bridge to nothing, unless you know exactly what you're raising that money for to get to a certain point. But where you see companies just death spirals when you got a bridge on a bridge on a bridge. Am I sort of answering your question?
Well, I was asking about the mix. Sorry, I've got your perspective. So you say that they may be hard to pitch. I've got the first safe in Minnesota now.
Okay. The one thing I'll caution you against debt, and then I'll let the lawyer take over, Doug, because he sees a lot more deals than I do. I hate debt. I hate convertibles to begin with, and then I hate debt even more. Debt's cheaper, obviously, much cheaper, but you're a growth company, right? So every time you take debt, you're slowing your growth. So it's just a question of how fast you want to grow. But it is cheaper for the company to take debt than equity. Doug?
I think in terms of what we're seeing for early stage financing, it's a lot of convertible debt. It's some priced round, equity rounds. We're not seeing very many safes or kisses. And the safes that we have done have all been sort of promoted from the West Coast. Maybe it's an investor who says that's what we want to do, or someone who moved back from California and says this is what I'm comfortable with. But we're just not seeing very much of it. And to me, there are a couple of ways to raise capital. One is to go and find your lead investor. And to me, you don't even talk about that until you get them interested. Let them tell you what they want. If you're going to go out and raise 25 and 50 from investors and you have to come up with something, in this community, I don't think a safe is a good way to start. If you're going to raise money in California, I think it's a much better way. Generally speaking, I think investors here are comfortable with convertible debt, and they're comfortable with priced rounds, even like a Series Seed, which is like a baby version of a Series A. That's what we'll sell here. I'm just not seeing the acceptance of the other deals.
Tim, from a seller's perspective, when those folks carry some of the paper, are they getting interest rates on those? How are those structured?
Yeah, typically, from the people I'm working with who have done a number of deals, rates 5%, 6%, 7%, depending on the business and the expectations of the seller.
Just my 2 cents worth on your thing. As an equity investor, the first money in or the most current money in is taking the most risk. In theory, risk gets reduced over time. So I, like John, would say, well, why would I do a convertible deal? Because I'm just pushing on. It seems, I mean, it's investor or it's entrepreneur friendly, and it pushes down the road a valuation discussion. I get that, but if I'm giving up my money, why would I not want to try to price it today? Because no matter what happens, if it's good, price is going up. So I'm a fan as an investor of trying to price it now rather than pushing it down the road.
One thing just to comment to that is with the convertible debt deals, everyone that we're seeing now has a valuation cap. So it used to be where you'll get a discount to the next round. Well, if the company's worth $5 million today and the next round's $40 million, that doesn't help you a lot. If you put that valuation cap in there, that means you won't get a deal that's worse than a $5 million pre-money. So there's always a valuation cap in there that prevents you from getting a worse deal in the future when you think it's going to be a better deal.
Yes, we ended up with a cap and discount.
But if somebody asked you what's the primary reason for doing that, I'm going to guess it's because you didn't want to try to value it now. Is that correct?
That was part of the reason, and that was, it was the 11th hour that our attorneys went up to Weinstein said, just put it down.
Yeah, people do that, and that's an entrepreneur friendly, but from an investor's perspective, I would be trying to price it now.
The other thing I've seen that's dangerous with some safes is they're what I call open safes. They don't have a deadline. Why in the heck would I want to invest at the beginning of the round? The valuation's changed by the time the round is finished, right? So you've got to have, any round, I would suggest that you have a PPM, you have a date. You may extend it, the board may extend the date, but you need to have, a 9-month time frame or a 6-month time frame or a year time frame.
Yeah, we did our student invest, so we have a 12-month period. We want to keep it open that long.
Okay.
A couple other hands back there,
Yeah,
yes.
For Doug, I'm in software, and I've been approached by the two largest players in my industry showing interest. And if you're involved as an angel, do you come in and help make that, figure out the right timing? Because that's a scary process when you're talking to, those bigger players, and help make that transition if it comes to fruition?
I think, again, for example, with Irish Angels, we would have some type of relationship. We might even have a board seat. If we don't, we always have a small number of folks who are interacting with that company. And we always say, if you need assistance on something, reach out to us. If it's not one of the people in that small group, it'll be someone else. Absolutely, we'll help you with that evaluation, see if we know those companies. There's always, if it leads to something positive for you, we want to help you with that. The challenge is if every company in our portfolio does that at the same time, we have limited resources. But, this may only occur once in your company's history. If this facilitates an exit or does something positive, absolutely we want to help.
Doug, I might even add to that I find it more interesting as to what's going on in the exit end of it than on raising money. Raising money is all about, John said, trust. But at the end, exiting is very important. And I run into entrepreneurs all the time that have an opportunity for an exit with what they call a strategic buyer, and I think they're leaving huge money on the table by not going to auction, for example, or other things. I think that's a great question. And as an investor, you guys, you can affect your own returns by helping the company along and doing the right thing. So I'd say any entrepreneur ought to be talking to their investors and making sure that.
Yeah, it might be quite possible that we think we're leaving money on the table, and if you reach one more milestone that you'll double your money, that's one way to look at it. Another is, hey, this thing's struggling and limping along, take it while you got it.
Or the economy's good and it's the right time to sell, so call Tim up because, hey, life is good right now and your financials are going well and you never know what's going to happen either with the economy or geopolitical situation or whatever. So, yes.
I'm interested to hear from the Irish Angels, but also from Tim and John as Angels. What is the frequency of communication with early stage ventures that you prefer? And how early do you want to know both about things that are going very well and things that could
And I think there are really two levels of communication. One is sort of what's written in the document. We want quarterly financial information. We want a summary. We want these metrics and those metrics, so that on a quarterly basis, we want to see the numbers and we want an update and we want significant developments. And again, there are usually one or two people who are directly involved with the company. They're in constant contact. It's whether, I don't know if it's weekly or bi-weekly or month, I don't know, but it's sort of this constant flow of information, especially, of course, if someone's on the board, that's going to happen naturally. If we don't have someone on the board, it's what's the latest? How can we help? What are your challenges? Share your successes. And we always encourage companies to be forthcoming with information, whether it's good or bad, just to keep us up to date. We can live with bad. That happens in every company. Just keep us up to date, and maybe we can help you. If you don't disclose it to us, there's no way we can help. So again, I think it's that quarterly financial or contractual-based information, and then it's the ongoing relationship and the free flow back and forth.
I would agree quarterly is what's expected with the shareholder letter, technically. Now, that being said, I want to share two stories that I think are interesting. One is when I thought that we were probably going under, private insurance companies weren't covering us. We didn't know where to turn. I went out with 4 of my top investors and basically I told them, listen, this is the situation. I've done everything I can. And to a T, all 4 of them, when I left, called me or as I was leaving and said, John, what's your next project? And I was blown away. I mean, I just told them that I just lost all their money probably, and all they want to know is what am I going to do next and what can they invest in. It's a weird thing. I had another investor that put the last money in on the deal, and he put a significant amount, $200,000. And it was right after I told him how we're kind of screwed. And we're doing this clinical study, and the insurance companies weren't covering us. And so I asked him, I said, Jim, why did you do that? And he said, well, I believed in you. And I said, well, why did you believe in me? And he said, because I trust you. And I was like, why did you trust me? He goes, because you told me the truth. I was thinking, if I would have told you more bad news, would I gotten more money?
But that's an interesting strategy.
No, it's worked out.
No, but so that's a luxury that you have, is how you want to communicate to your investors. And you can kind of read your investors and figure out who wants to be updated constantly. If she wants to, if you're annoying her. But I think there's something to, especially in this day where you're raising money all the time, to keep the story going. Not that unlike a publicly traded company when you always have to have good news to get to the next quarter or whatever. You've got to keep that story going in a positive way, a truthful way, but a positive way. And that buys you a lot of equity with your investors.
2 things from my side. I think you create a format that you like and feel comfortable with it, with your KPIs, your key performance indicators, financial metrics, a little blurb on what's working well, a little blurb on some struggles, whatever format it is, and you just populate it, and you just are in a rhythm. I agree, it's monthly, and so you come up with something that you like, and you're just feeding the investors on a monthly basis. And then I think the little kind of random things, hey, saw this article, it's relevant to our industry, thought you'd like to read it, or hey, saw this report or this conference, or so you're not really reporting per se, but you're keeping the touch points going, which Doug had talked to earlier. And then from a different perspective, because Doug and John and I are all kind of talking, generally speaking, about these smaller companies, but Tim, you said that Lazy Days was private equity owned. You were CEO, so how did you communicate with the investor group? How often? What was the format? That kind of thing.
Well, there was a reason why there was an opening for the job. I discovered when I got there. So it's not quite as in good shape as the story is told. So I found myself that it was a turnaround really from all tactical purposes. I needed to really amp up the communication, so it was frequent. And it was a lot of information. And, during that period, when you're the new guy taking over or you're just getting off the ground, frequent communication is good. And also, it sets that kind of trust basis, but it reminds them in that particular situation that, we inherited some real challenges. But I noticed that the gears shifted quickly, at least in this arrangement, you know, when they had 40-some companies to manage, that when we got going and going well after about the first year, no news was good news. So I adjusted my style and realized they didn't want to hear anymore and didn't need to hear anymore. And I took that as a compliment and said, you will fall into our normal rhythm of, you know, every quarter, every month, whatever. So I think also a little bit I learned is situational. You know, you really want to amp it up when you're going through some tumultuous times, and also when we were going through a big acquisition. You know, keep it very visible, keep it very transparent, and then get back into normal rhythms.
Great. Yep.
So, question for Doug. You talked about you work with students. What do you look for in a student, and to what extent do the students work with you?
Students, my experience in working with students is they need a lot of hand-holding. They don't have much experience. Often they think they know more than they do. I think, on the other hand, they're very enthusiastic. You know, they'll work all night to get something done, and they can be very passionate. One of the things that I've noticed over the years is in groups of students, inevitably, out of 5, 3 will scatter, 1 will do a poor job, and 1 will carry the load. That's just how it always works, and that's why you need to protect the equity up front. But in terms of students, it's a lot of education. It's a lot of sharing experience and resources. And we sometimes do pro bono work for student companies that are on the verge of getting started. And what we'll do is help them get started in the hopes that at some point they will become a real client and can, you know, pay fees and contribute. And you know, for us, it's about the long-term relationship. And if we can help a bunch of student entrepreneurs turn into real businesses, that's great for us. And we have a number of those that have worked out really well, and we have some that haven't worked out. You write off the fees and you move on. Did I answer your question?
So I would add a couple of things to that. I've had a number of students work for me over the years, and now that enough time has gone by. So I have many people in the metro area here that I do work with now on a kind of peer-to-peer basis, whereas they worked for me 10 years ago or 15 years ago. And so that little project that might not be that significant in the scheme of things actually is important, because you're creating a relationship with someone and you want to be that one person in the group that did what they were supposed to do. But also I think it could turn it around and put some responsibility on the folks that you're doing work with, and being real clear about what the goals are and what success looks like, and manage up, as they say, and keep whoever you're working with or the students are working with to hold their superiors accountable for doing things and being clear on what they want and deadlines and so on and so forth.
I just make a comment too, the fact that you're here is great, so you're curious, and one of the things that I look for too is working with students over the years is, are they curious about it? I mean, they really get passionate about it. And when I watch my son, Ryan, who graduated from here last spring, when I watch him come home once in a while, he's got all of the Shark Tank episodes on our DVR. I mean, the intensity that he watches that show and dissects each and every one of those participants just shows me that he's more than curious. There's a lot of passion there. And, you know, he's showing up to events like this now that he's out in the real world, has a job, and he's realizing, you know, that it's just the beginning of a career, and you got to build that network. So Rick's right on. I mean, there's people you interact with today, you interact with 6 months from now, 12 months from now, that, you know, 20 years later, you're on a panel, you're helping each other find clients, you're helping each other put deals together, whatever it is. So the investment like this pays off.
And are you watching for profit?
I don't, for reasons obvious at the time. Our #1 competitor, I refuse to watch his shows. Now he goes and buys Gander Mountain. I can't get rid of the guy. You know?
Yeah. Warren.
In addition, rather than a question, and it plays off something that Doug said, I've mentored probably several hundred students through my career. And one of the things that, as a mentor, you find out is that frequently, almost always, the mentor learns as much as the student does. But playing off of
what Doug had mentioned of being coachable is exceptionally important because in any entrepreneurial type of function, you have to be constantly learning because an entrepreneur is doing many different things all the time. And if you don't constantly learn, and especially as a younger person, you just aren't going to make it. So that's something that you have to look forward to until the day that you die.
Yes.
I have a question that specific to medical tech, med tech space. So if you had a point in time where you had to make decisions if you were going to pursue more of the angel funding as opposed to grant-based funding in partnership with academic institutions or healthcare companies or even nonprofits,
Okay.
why you chose to do what you did?
Well, we thought they were going to sell in 3 years, so we didn't have time for SBIR. We were wrong. I think more and more deals are being done with corporate and venture combined. The truth is, there's no venture capital in Minnesota today. There's none. So there's, go for angel. If you look at the angel sources in Minnesota, or capital sources, as you look, now that being said, I've got a company, Adrenacard, that has to raise $10 to $12 million to get through the FDA, right? Because it's a pharmaceutical / medical device. So we have to raise venture capital. So we're going to be talking to the coast and other places. The other side of that is, venture fundraising is kind of like winning the lottery versus angel financing is, not only do you have to be the best cardiac company in the country, you might have to be the best company in the country to get venture capital these days. It's not an easy market. There's just not much early stage venture. And there are some funds that have a person here, by the way, but in general, there aren't any early stage venture funds here. So you're probably looking at angel capital, unless you're the type of deal that can go into top, medical device venture company. Now, and then you asked about corporate. I think that, again, the corporate med tech world is getting much more involved. In fact, even hedge funds are getting involved much, but that's all later financing. So, I think you have to look at all of them, but depending on how much money you need, because if you need to, I raised $6 million over 7 years, or basically 8 years. To go out and raise $20 million of angel financing isn't going to happen. It's very very unlikely unless you have a single investor that can do that. So then you are looking at venture capital. I don't know if I completely answered your question, but.
Yes, sir.
What about crowd funding? What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of crowd. I think there's much more hype than there is. A lot of the deals never, if you want to have a blip, in a consumer-based, product. Right now, we're doing Indiegogo. We have for our hip dysplasia patch, we're doing one of those. Now, the concern there is you get a blip, you get a bunch of interest, and then it falls off, right? Or you get a bunch of equity holders. My colleague who acquired us, he hates my AV investors. It drives him nuts. Just the reporting and having to deal with people and getting signed. I had to go out and get 80 people to sign a document that I hadn't talked to in 6 years. It can be a kind of a pain. And so a lot of even with the equity-based crowdfunding, it can be a huge headache. So I think it's a market that's interesting, but I think it hasn't been developed to a point now where unless you're doing a movie or have a product, it makes a whole lot of sense.
Doug?
I think it's interesting, and it hasn't been utilized a whole lot. I think it's a response to a real problem, and it's challenging to raise capital. I'm not sure if it's the best response to that problem, but it is a response, and that's a good thing. I'm seeing a little bit of activity, but there are some drawbacks, and I think there are too many requirements, in terms of legal and accounting and all those things to make it as viable as it should be. I wish they would scale those back, and if you need to raise $500,000 and use crowdfunding, I think it's great. But it seems like the accountants and the lawyers benefited from that way too much, and the entrepreneurs are still having a challenge. And my experience is even with those resources, you still have to go out and find investors. It's a marketing platform to go find investors. It's not an investment banker who has this ready group of investors. Now, some of these accredited investor groups, these groups where you can publicly solicit accredited investors, Circle Up is one that my clients have used. That's different. They have some money throughout their network, and you put it up there, and people will invest. But most crowdfunding isn't like that, and it's still a lot of work. I do see some good things. I like that we're trying to be creative, but if we could ease back the regulations and make it work for us a little better, I think it would be helpful.
What are some of those regulations?
Well, you need to do a full disclosure document. You might have to have reviewed or audited financial information, and it's just, pardon?
That's over $1 million that have to be reviewed or audited.
Yeah, so it's just, it's a little bit more, whereas a lot of the deals we're doing for $1 million, you know, it's a subscription agreement, it's a business plan, and it's meetings, and they do some of their own due diligence. And I mean, a lot of companies don't have some of those resources to pay lawyers and accountants at that early stage. And it just seems like it's a little bit much. And I understand the regulators are concerned that all these people are going to come and raise money and use it to go to trips to Vegas or something. And I understand that, but there are a lot of companies that need to raise capital that are having challenges. It's a great way, I think, to start, but the reality is it's just not quite ready for prime time the way that it's structured.
I'd say use it as a marketing tool, a PR machine, and try to raise money elsewhere and kind of use it as just one other way to get some visibility for what you're doing. Anyway, Lois.
Two questions. This was going to be the second one, but where the topic is, I'll ask it at this point. I'm newly and very little familiar with Kiva, and I believe there are a couple of other, 2-3 other entities that are like that.
No, microloan?
Yes.
Microloan.
Right. Are there any panel members that are familiar with Kiva and microloans online, and what are the feelings about those?
I'm familiar.
No, go ahead. Well, I'll chime in after you give something up.
Go for it.
All right, so microloans actually got started in third world countries as a way to give back, and it was also a way that you wouldn't need a lot of money to have a big impact. So if you took $100,000 and you split it into $500 increments, you could touch a lot of people and get them going with some tools or a training course or something. And so kind of the concept was started as kind of top down towards the entrepreneur. So I guess the question I would have for you is, what was the context of where you were going with that?
Minnesota-based startup, just met them rather recently, and they needed $10,000, which is a small amount of money,
okay.
but not 500.
Okay,
And so they did a Kiva loan,
okay,
and as a duration, you have to meet the timeline. They brought people to the table, and then Google stepped in and closed out the limit, and so they got the loan.
okay.
So I, number one, was just curious what the panel's reaction was to it, and number two, I don't know how that Google piece fit.
Sure.
Yeah, so just 2 seconds. So Kiva, the whole, what I'll call, really the focus was, where this really started, the whole industry was India,
Right.
with small, with small loans to women
Right.
collectives. And the repayment rate was outstanding. And this is a whole new industry of, I'll call it collaborative debt financing, not just with Kiva, but there's 10 other startups.
Right.
And it turns out that people that take these loans from other people, they pay back most of the time. I mean, at a very high rate, higher than, as high potentially as bank financing, especially unsecured. So it's interesting.
So the second half of that, why are you asking, Lois, is found myself wondering, based on what you just said, John, if there's a marketplace for a souped-up kiva that could not have some of the downfall
Sure.
of the equity crowdfunding.
So, in town in Minneapolis, do you know Joe Savaggio? She's been forever leader in the local philanthropy marketplace. Anyway, he started micro grants 15, 20 years ago. I don't know that they would go all the way to 10,000, but the scenario you just described, if that person wants, I think, 500 to say a couple of thousand, Joe's business is, microgrants is in the business to do that. And then the other thing, META also does pretty small loans, and I don't know with what other names would be in town, but I'm sure, you know, asking around, and like John's strategy, every person you talk to, you ask for another name or two. There's probably others out there too.
Also the peer-to-peer lending platforms, Prosper and Lending Club.
Okay, say it one more time.
Prosper and Lending Club.
Prosper and Lending Club,
Yeah,
okay.
There's also On Deck Capital is another one. But so like with Prosper and Lending Club, it's up to $40,000. The rate varies depending on the quality of the borrower, and repayment terms of 3 or 5 years, and the minimum investment is $25.
Okay.
If you're going to fund your startup with some of that, it's not that far from a credit card.
Exactly.
And META doesn't give the loans, it goes through SBA, Small Business
Okay.
Association, Administration.
Okay.
And certain banks that work with SBA.
Okay, all right. Does Drake work with the SBA?
Absolutely.
Okay, Rick, raise your hand.
Here I am.
All right, there he is. Okay. Got about 5 minutes left. I have a couple of questions that I think would be valuable, so let me shift gears. 30 seconds to 1 minute. What recommendations would you have for folks who are going to be out raising money? 30 seconds to 1 minute.
Well, one thing I would say is know what you're looking for, have an understanding of who your audience is, and be prepared. Put the information together that investors want to see. You have to figure out those things. Well, it's depending on what you're raising and how you're raising. It could be a deck, a presentation. It could be an executive summary. It could be a short business plan. It could be a bunch of articles about the industry. Just something to pique my attention. And remember, a lot of investors see a lot of deals. You know, how can you grab me and make me want to know more? And the other thing is, if you can get to me through one of my trusted sources, that's a lot better than just sending something over the transom.
Yeah, I would go back to, you know, trust, enthusiasm, and don't be shy, right? You got to ask everybody. I will also say that no one's ever had their feelings hurt by being asked for too much. You know, if I can invest $25,000 and somebody says, will you put in $250,000, that doesn't hurt my feelings. So that's sometimes a mistake people make. It's hard sometimes, but I would also encourage you to go your first 10 meetings, make sure there are people that aren't going to invest. So that's practice time. You know, that's how you learn. First, who used to have Space Center Ventures?
Oh, Paul?
Paul Knapp. That was my first call. I had no idea what I was doing at all. This was my first medical deal. I called Paul and I said, this is what we're doing. And he said, well, who's going to be, you know, who's your call point? And I said, doctors. And he said, what kind of doctors? And I said, I have absolutely no idea. Let me call you back.
Tim, any advice for folks out there raising money?
I think the plan is good, and you know, the advice is right on. But you know, I think also just looking at how do you differentiate and get people's attention. You know, there's just so much Me Too out in the market, and with some thought and creativity, it doesn't. You know, you can do it. You can come out with something and be able to position the business or the idea or whatever the opportunity is to be different.
Next question, again, 30 seconds to a minute. What is the number one mistake that you've seen or the deal killer that you see entrepreneurs do or say?
Number one, I'm going to say a couple. Obviously, valuation. Greed on the early round, and just not having. You got to spend a lot of time and make sure you're asking for the right amount for where your business is at, especially in the world of unicorns and crazy valuations. And then the second part is the difficult part. The art is walking the plank between creating excitement and being a liar. So being credible. And so that credibility is everything. And as soon as you overdo that, you're done.
I'd build on John's point there because one of my favorite stories of being in a meeting with an owner is spent the first 20 minutes telling me how great the company was, and then got to the slide on the financials, and it was over a 5-year period, and they hadn't made any money in 5 years. And I thought, in terms of credibility, it's not matching. So that was really eye-opening to hear such a build-up and a great story about how well-positioned the company was, and then to look at 5 years right in the middle of this great recovery, right, not making any money.
And I think 2 items are market and money. Your market isn't big enough to get the return that I'm looking for. That's one problem. And you're going to need a lot more money than you think you do.
Always. Kind of like that kitchen remodel project. So, last question. Looking back and over your career, learned a lot of things, had a lot of influences. You had hopefully some good mentors. What would you, around this kind of growing a business and fundraising discussion we're having here today, what would you tell your earlier self if you looked back in time with where you're at today? That's a curveball.
How long do you have?
30 seconds to a minute each.
I'm gonna answer that a little differently. There's a great book called Thinking Slow and Thinking Fast that I highly recommend. But if you want one thing for your son as a student or your daughter as a student, especially as an entrepreneur, is optimism. Now, it can be grown. I currently have a CEO of my company that is literally Steve Jobs. He says that we're going to be a $100 million company, and he's done this 4 times now. And sure enough, he creates a sense of belief. And so optimism, number one, and then back to your conversation before is curiosity. Good CEOs are naturally curious people. They want to know everything that's going. They're truly, hopefully not mucking things up, but they're truly curious in all parts of the business. And those are 2 great traits that you can check yourself and see if you have. One final thing is, if you're thinking about raising money and starting a company, talk to your friends, talk to your spouse, talk to your family. Let them know that you're going to be crazy for the next 4 years. And then all you're going to think about and talk about is this one thing. And I look back and I feel just terrible for my parents and my friends for looking back for 5 years. I've now chilled out, but for 5 years, it was OrthoCor. And, thank gosh they're patient people and would tolerate this. But know that that's probably going to happen to you. If you're going to succeed, it will happen to you.
Great, thank you. Tim, Doug?
I would say surround yourself with high-quality people in all aspects of your business, whether it's the people who work with you, your board members. I've seen companies do amazing things through their people. And a lot of entrepreneurs that I've seen over the years, they look back and they say, boy, I should have never brought that person in. I knew there was something not right, and they did it because they needed something and they were a little desperate. Surround yourself with top people, be comfortable with those people, and expect a lot from them, and they'll perform.
Can I just chime in over Doug? So one of the lessons I learned as an early stage venture capitalist is it's somewhat facetious, but it's true. If you have a choice between investing in an A+ person or a B+ person, always invest in the B+ person, because the A+ person isn't going to delegate because they can do it better than everyone else, and they're not going to hire anyone better than them. The B+ person knows how to delegate and find great, outstanding talent and give them all the credit, and act as a facilitator and somebody who can bring the business together.
Thank you. Tim, you've had a little time here to noodle on what would you tell your earlier self.
I think the points being made around talent are what it all gets boiled down to. I've learned that the hard way time and time again. I think the piece for you as an individual, for me as an individual, here I am speaking to myself, where am I, in the back, front? Okay. Is find people who have strengths in areas that you don't. So you got to have a high level of self-awareness and know, here's the 2 or 3 things that I'm really good at, and wow, I got some blind spots or some areas I'm not good at, and I'm going to find the people who are really good at that, and that's who I want on my team and who I want to work with. So that takes a level of humbleness and humility as a leader, entrepreneur, future CEO, whatever the role is, to acknowledge it, understand it, and put it to use.
All right. Thank you very much. Our speakers will stick around for a little bit before they have to run. Thank you for being here. Thank you to our panelists, and let's give them a round of applause.
That takes
Steve Shire's another guy. Dick is dead. I'm teasing. No, it's not. I know you know they're